Hello, everyone. This will be a review over this week's content, which mainly has to deal with cameras. So first thing we want to do is we want to just kind of show big picture what we did. And what we added was this camera extends component class, where we just have a static get main, which returns your GameObject.find camera. With this will then be added inside of scene, inside of your constructor. If type of camera doesn't equal undefined, then we will instantiate this camera game object at 0, 0, and where we then add the component camera to it. This big picture just means that every single scene that you have will have a camera in it. There is one slight bug that kind of occurs now with additive scenes. So if we go over into our additive scene and we kind of run it, so we have our additive scene. Now if you go to more tools, dev tools, I have a print statement printing out our game objects. And you see we have two camera game objects now. And slight issue, in Unity you can't have two cameras, but for the purpose of this class, I don't think it's particularly necessary. So if you wanted to resolve this, what I would, instead of looping, and when we do our load scene and additive is true, instead of looping through just scene.gameObjects, filter out based off of the name gameObjects.camera, and now you'll see we have that removed, so that now when you access camera, it will always be that first initial camera game object. So that was a small little fix that needed to happen. What else? So now what happens is, if we open live server, now we have a camera, and yeah, big picture there, here's our camera. We have that little space where we have to move 25 in order for it to really move the camera, so we have that little wiggle room. And then big picture, we also have like an edge, quote unquote, that where the camera can't move past. The way we do this is after we do our this.transform.position and apply it, we check if the camera position and our current position is has a difference of 25. If it does, then we update our camera position to be the transform position plus 25. We also just set the scale equal to 0.55, and you see that if we reset that, it just gets bigger. So that there's also the scale aspect of that. Finally, we do clamp. The clamping between 100 and 300 is how we prevent movement any further regarding this little barrier right here. These are just some common use cases that were done for camera. The other thing we did was we did layers. So inside of, let's do this first. So now what happens is now we have a world layer, but then we also have a screen layer. And I would say this is very important conceptually to understand. Our screen layer is just what is displayed in our screen. And it's just a part of, but in order for us to get into the world layer, rephrase this. We have our scene, or our screen, and our screen is a part of the world in the sense that we can access a specific part of the world through the screen. But the coordinates of the screen and the coordinates of the world are two different coordinates spaces. In order to understand this, or in order to achieve screen spaces into our world space, we had to update our mouse collisions, where we had to basically reverse the process of our camera in order to get the world space of our current mouse position, so that then we can do collisions with our mouse based off of that. There's a slight error issue now, where say, for example, you have a UI component and you want to collide with the mouse with that UI component. That is not possible. So there is a couple fixes for this. Unity has a on point method basically. So instead of on mouse exit, on mouse enter, on mouse over, it has an on point, over, on point enter, on point exit, on point down, that type of thing. And you can Google it on your own time. But what it basically does is instead of looping through all of your rigid body components, what you do is you loop through all of your UI components, and then you basically say, hey, given just this basic mouse input value, what is the let's do this actually. So let's do let UI game objects equal this dot game objects dot filter. And this is more pseudo code rather than true code, but so then we get the layer and then we set it equal, or if it's equal UI, and then we do a simple for loop where we do for const UI object in UI game objects of so now we loop through and now we do if collidable. And instead of collidable, you do UI game object. There's going to be an error where in collision point game object, you don't have a collider. So big picture, what you'll have to do is also update point game object, where if it has a collider, you get the point, you use transform points. If it has a polygon, you just do what we did earlier where we just add the world space to it, or the game objects transform to the points in order to get it. Otherwise, you just return false. And then instead of doing this frame mouse collisions, you could do let this frame point collisions. And then, and then instead of doing this, and now you would have your point collisions instead. So now you could copy and paste all this below code, but instead of doing on mouse over, you do on point over and that type of stuff. So that is one kind of situation that now has occurred that you may need to help resolve. Finally, the other thing that we did was we included layers. With this now, we have inside of our draw, since we are now doing camera stuff, what we have to do is we save and translate into the middle of our screen. Or by like the middle of our screen, and then we transform based off of the camera's transform, and then we draw everything. But the way we draw now is also different with layers. So what we do is for every single layer, other than the UI layer, we draw in the respective order of the layer. So we filter out just for that layer, and then we draw it, and then we restore it. But then afterwards, then we go through the game objects that have the UI layer to then draw it. So basically what's happening is, say we had a background layer, which was the walls, and then the foreground layer, which was the player. What we would do is we would loop through all of the game objects, and we'd say, okay, get all the ones that have the background layer on it and draw it first. So then those would be drawn first. Then you would have the character, which is the foreground layer, which then would be drawn next. And then at the very end, then we loop through the UI to then draw the UI, which would be up there. So big picture, that is pretty much the majority of everything. So if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns that you kind of need help with, you can always email me or Rick's.